Why was no one looking at her? The briefing room was packed, shoulder to shoulder, maps covering every surface, radio static crackling through the thick air that smelled like gun oil and stale coffee, and in the corner, pressed against the wall like she didn't belong, stood Arden Vale, scrub still dusted with sand from the last medevac run, notepad in hand, eyes on the terrain map projected at the front. She wasn't there to speak, just to listen, in case the assault plans meant more wounded heading her way. Commander Holt Brannick on the room, his uniform crisp despite the desert heat, laser pointer dancing across the projected terrain like he owned every inch of it. He was the kind of leader who believed wars were won by men like him. Tough, decisive, with scars from operations that made headlines. Next to him, Lieutenant Pierce Kellen leaned against the table, arms crossed, that permanent smirk on his face, like he'd seen everything and judged most of it lacking. And overseeing it all was Major Rowan Skye, older, gray at the temples, the one who coordinated the Allied push but kept his words measured, watching more than talking. Holt wrapped up the assault plan, his voice booming as he assigned sectors. Then his eyes landed on Arden, almost by accident, like she just materialized out of thin air. He stopped, tilted his head slightly, let out a short laugh that wasn't meant to include her. "Hold up, what's the nurse doing in here? This is tactics, not triage." The room shifted, a few chuckles rippling through the other SEALs scattered around. Pierce jumped in quick, his tone laced with that fake concern that hid the bite. "Yeah, seriously, Arden, right? You handle the boo-boos after we do the real work. No offense, but stick to your lane." One of the younger operators, a guy with tattoos snaking up his arms, piped up from the back. "Didn't even look her way. Last thing we need is some aid worker second-guessing the route. You'd probably get lost following your own bandages." The laughter grew, not loud but steady, like they were all in on a joke she wasn't part of. But the mockery didn't stop at words. Pierce, feigning a need to stretch his legs, swung his heavy combat boot outward, deliberately. The impact sent her carefully organized medical field bag skidding across the floor, sterile sealed packs scattered, 2 vials of epinephrine shattered on the concrete. The sharp smell of medicine filled the air instantly. Pierce didn't even look down, just adjusted his stance while muttering about clutter and hazards in a war room. Arden knelt immediately, her hands hovering over the broken glass, checking for salvageable supplies. The tattooed operator stepped over her hands like she was furniture, dusted his boot on her scrub pant leg. No one offered to help. They simply watched the help clean up her mess, reinforcing the silent hierarchy that she was beneath the dirt on their boots. Arden didn't move from her spot after collecting the debris. She adjusted the notepad in her hand, fingers steady, kept her eyes on the map, no flush in her cheeks, no quick glance away. But the air got thicker, the way it does when words land harder than intended. Holt waved it off, turning back to the group. "All right, enough. She's here for support, that's it. Don't want her thinking she belongs in the huddle." Pierce leaned over to the tattooed guy, loud enough for everyone. "Bet she couldn't tell an AK from a slingshot. How'd they even let her on base without a babysitter?" More nods, a couple of guys shifting their chairs like the whole thing was settled. Arden set her pen down slowly, the click echoing just a touch louder than it should have. She looked straight at Pierce. "You're done." 2 words, calm, no edge. But the room quieted like someone had flipped a switch. No one answered. She picked up her notepad and stepped back, letting the silence hang. Before she could retreat completely, Holt moved to the main projector, his broad shoulders deliberately blocking her view of the topographical display. He tapped the screen with his knuckles, glancing back at her with exaggerated patience, like a teacher dealing with a slow child. "Actually, let's go dark on this section," he announced, snapping the lens cap onto the projector. plunging the map into darkness just as Arden's eyes had begun to scan the elevation lines. Classified clearance only from this point on. We can't have civilians leaking our extraction points because they got scared and gossiped to the locals. He winked at the team. Security protocol, you understand. Maybe go check the inventory on Band-Aids. Make sure we have the ones with the little cartoons on them. The door was held open by a junior officer. A silent but forceful invitation for her to leave before the real men continued. The briefing wrapped up after that, Holt barking final orders, the team filing out, gear clinking as they went. Arden lingered for a second, tracing a finger along the edge of the map where the assault path curved through a valley. Major Rowan caught it, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he said nothing, just gathered his files and nodded her way before leaving. Outside, the sun beat down on the tents, dust kicking up from Humvees rolling in. Arden walked back to the medical tent, her steps even, passing a group of locals who'd come for supplies. One of them, an older man with a bandaged arm, touched her sleeve and murmured thanks in broken English. She nodded, handed him extra gauze without a word. That afternoon, the humiliation followed her into the armory. She'd gone to return a borrowed radio battery. Pierce and Miller, the tattooed operator, were stripping their rifles on a bench. Miller was struggling with the seating of his scope, cursing as he twisted the mounting screws with reckless force. Arden paused, watching him violently mistreat the delicate optics. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placed a finger on the tension ring. "You're over-torquing the base," she said, her voice flat. "It'll throw your zero by 3 inches at 200 yards once the barrel heats up." Miller froze, then burst out laughing, looking at Pierce. "Did you hear that? The nurse thinks she knows ballistics." Pierce grabbed a rag and tossed it at her face. "Wipe the table down while you're here, sweetheart. Leave the guns to the people who actually pull triggers." They tightened the screws even harder, deliberately ignoring her warning, sealing their own inaccuracy into the weapon. Back inside the medical tent, she prepped kits, her hands moving automatically, folding bandages that smelled faintly of antiseptic, but her gaze drifted to an old photo tucked in her pack, a faded shot of a different unit, faces blurred by time, rifles slung over shoulders. She paused, fingers brushing it, then zipped the pack shut. That night, as the base quieted under a starless sky, Arden sat outside her tent, sketching on a scrap of paper, not doodles, lines that looked like terrain, marking spots with small X's. A patrol came back, voices low, reporting minor contact. She listened from the shadows, piecing together the chatter about enemy movements. The next morning, before the team geared up, she approached the staging area, holding a single sheet of paper. Holt was checking his gear, didn't look up when she stopped in front of him. "Commander, the route you're taking through that valley." "Not now, Vale." "Sir, the terrain analysis shows." He cut her off with a raised hand, not angry, just dismissive, like she was background noise. "I appreciate the concern, but we've got intel teams for this. You focus on keeping your supplies stocked." Pierce walked past, bumping her shoulder. "Move along, Florence Nightingale. The grown-ups are working." She stood there for a moment, the paper still in her hand. Then she turned and walked away. But what she saw in that briefing room, what she traced on that map, it stayed with her. Because sometimes being ignored is the worst kind of suffering. Not the anger, not the shouting, just the erasure. The idea that your voice doesn't matter, that your presence is inconvenient. And Arden felt it, every dismissive laugh, every shoulder bump, every time they looked through her like she was glass. But there was something they didn't know about her yet, something she hadn't told them. Not yet. How do you stay calm when everyone thinks you're nothing? The mission launched at dawn, 48 hours after that briefing. The convoy rolled out in a cloud of dust and diesel fumes, Holt in the lead vehicle, Pierce coordinating the second. the valley route they'd chosen, the one Arden had tried to warn them about. She stayed behind, like she was supposed to, prepping the medical tent for the wounded she knew would come. Because she'd seen that terrain, studied it, and she knew what waited in that valley. 6 hours into the operation, the radio crackled to life. "Base, this is Alpha 1, we're taking fire, heavy contact, multiple casualties." Arden's hands moved before her mind caught up, grabbing supplies, organizing trauma kits, her movements practiced, automatic. Another transmission, static, shouting in the background. "We're pinned down. Enemy has the high ground. Repeat, enemy has the high ground." The high ground, the ridge she'd marked on that map, the one she tried to tell them about. The medevac choppers lifted off within minutes. Arden climbed into the second bird, strapping in among the door gunners. No one questioned her presence. When bullets were flying, they needed every pair of hands. The helicopter banked hard over the valley, and there below she could see it. The convoy scattered, vehicles burning, SEALs taking cover behind whatever they could find, enemy fire raining down from the ridge. Exactly where she'd predicted. The chopper touched down in a storm of sand. Arden jumped out before the skids fully settled, running low, heading toward the nearest wounded. A young sergeant, leg torn open by shrapnel, screaming. She dropped beside him, hands working fast, tourniquet, pressure, words of reassurance she'd said 1,000 times. "Stay with me, you're going home, stay with me." Gunfire cracked overhead. She didn't flinch, just kept working. Pierce was there, shouting orders, trying to coordinate a counterattack, but his voice had an edge to it now, not confidence, desperation. They were losing. Holt crawled over, blood streaking down his face from a gash above his eye. "Vale, we need to pull back. Get the wounded to the extraction point." She nodded, started organizing the movement, but as she looked at the terrain, at the enemy positions, at the way this was unfolding, she knew something they didn't. This wasn't just a firefight. This was an ambush, carefully planned, and the extraction point they were heading toward, it was the kill zone. She grabbed Holt's vest, pulled him close. "Don't go to the primary LZ, it's compromised." He stared at her, blood and sweat mixing on his face. "What are you talking about?" "The extraction point, they know where it is. You go there, you're all dead." "How could you possibly?" "Trust me." 2 words, simple, direct. But the look in her eyes, it wasn't the quiet nurse anymore. It was something else, something that made Holt hesitate. Pierce was there now, hearing the exchange. "We don't have time for this, follow the plan." "The plan is going to get everyone killed," Arden said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And what do you suggest?" Pierce shot back, anger and fear mixing in his voice. "You got a better idea, nurse." She pointed to a cluster of rocks 200 meters west. "Secondary position, better cover, they won't expect it, we can hold there until extraction." Holt looked at Pierce, then back at Arden. The commander who dismissed her in that briefing room now faced with a choice: trust his training, his rank, his ego, or trust the woman everyone had ignored. Bullets snapped past. Someone screamed in the background. "Fine," Holt said. "Move to the secondary position. Go, go." The team shifted, moving fast but controlled. Arden helped carry the wounded, her small frame supporting a soldier twice her size, muscle memory from deployments they knew nothing about. They reached the rocks, set up a defensive perimeter, and within minutes enemy fire shifted, concentrated on the primary extraction point. The place they would have been. The place that erupted in explosions as mortars rained down, turning it into a crater. Pierce stared at the smoke rising from where they should have been, his face pale. He turned to look at Arden. She was already working on another casualty, hands steady, focus complete. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. She didn't look up. Someone had to be paying attention. The extraction choppers came, lifted them out one by one, wounded first, then the team. Arden was the last one on, standing in the door as they lifted off, watching the valley disappear below. When they landed back at base, Holt pulled her aside, away from the others. "Vale, what you did out there." "I did my job, sir." "That wasn't just nursing." She met his eyes. "No, it wasn't." "Who are you?" She paused, the question hanging in the desert air. "Someone who learned the hard way that the world doesn't make room for you. You have to make room for yourself." She walked away, leaving him standing there, confused, shaken. But something had shifted, in him, in the way he looked at her. Because doubt is a strange thing. It creeps in slowly, makes you question what you thought you knew, and Holt was starting to wonder if everything he believed about Arden Vale was wrong. The team gathered that night, going over what happened, trying to make sense of the ambush, the losses, the narrow escape. And in every conversation, Arden's name came up. The nurse who predicted the trap, who found the safe position, who moved through gunfire like she'd done it before. Miller, the tattooed operator, sat cleaning his rifle, the one with the scope she'd warned him about. He'd missed 3 shots during the firefight, targets he should have hit easily. He looked at the scope, then at the tension ring she'd pointed to. And quietly, he started to loosen the screws. What happens when the people who ignored you suddenly need you? The base changed after the valley. Nothing official, no announcements, no apologies, but the looks were different. The space around Arden felt less like isolation and more like observation. They were watching her now, really watching. Piers passed her in the mess hall, actually stepped aside to let her through, didn't say anything, but the gesture spoke volumes. Miller approached her near the supply depot, awkward, hands in his pockets. "About the scope, you were right, it was off." She nodded, fixed it. "Yeah," he paused, "thanks." "Don't thank me, just listen next time." He walked away, and Arden felt it, that small shift, from invisible to visible. But Holt was different. He'd started digging, asking questions, making calls, and the more he learned, the less sense it made. Arden Vale, field nurse, civilian contractor, no military record in the system. Except that wasn't true. There was a record, buried, redacted, hidden behind security clearances he didn't have. So he went to Rowan. The major was in his office, files spread across his desk, maps, intel reports, the kind of paperwork that never ended in a war zone. "I need to know about Vale," Holt said, closing the door behind him. Rowan looked up, no surprise on his face, like he'd been expecting this. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Who is she?" Rowan leaned back, studying Holt for a long moment. Then he reached into a locked drawer, pulled out a single folder, marked with classification stamps that made Holt's clearance look amateur. "This doesn't leave this room," Rowan said. He opened the folder, slid a photo across the desk. A younger woman, same face, but different, harder, holding a rifle almost as big as she was, standing over the body of a warlord the entire coalition had failed to catch for a decade. Holt stared. "What is this?" "Project Wraith," Rowan said quietly. 112 confirmed kills, specialist in asymmetric warfare and high-value target neutralization. "That's impossible." Her code name was the White Death. The words hit Holt like a physical blow. He'd heard that name, whispered in intel briefings. A ghost, a legend, someone who operated in the shadows and left no trace. Why is she here? Why is she working as a nurse? Rowan closed the folder. Because she refused an order, refused to fire on civilians during an operation that went sideways. They tried to court-martial her. She vanished instead, resurfaced a year later as an aid worker. And we didn't know. No one knows, that's the point. She erased herself, started over. Holt sat down, the weight of it settling on him, every dismissive comment, every laugh, every time they treated her like she didn't matter. "My God," he whispered, "what have we done?" Rowan looked at him. "You treated her like she was invisible, and she let you, because that's what she wanted, to be invisible." "Why tell me now?" "Because it doesn't matter what she wanted. The war is coming here, and we're going to need her." Holt left the office. The folder's contents burned into his mind. He walked across the base, past soldiers repairing equipment, past the medical tent where Arden was probably working. He wanted to tell her, to apologize, to explain. But what do you say to someone you've wronged so completely? That night, intelligence came in. Enemy forces massing, preparing for a major assault. The base was the target, and they were outnumbered 3-1. The briefing was urgent. Every available operator packed into the room, Holt at the front, maps showing enemy positions, red markers everywhere. "We have 48 hours, he said, "maybe less. They're going to hit us hard." Pierce spoke up. "What's the defensive plan?" "Still working on it. We need to fortify key positions, set up overlapping fields of fire and—" "That won't work." The voice came from the back, quiet but clear. Everyone turned. Arden stood there, no notepad this time, arms crossed. Holt hesitated. "Vale, this isn't." "I know what this is, and your plan won't work." The room went silent. Pierce started to say something, but Holt held up a hand. "Why not?" "Because you're thinking like a defensive force, trying to hold static positions. They'll overwhelm you. You need to move, create kill zones, force them to fight on your terms, not theirs." She stepped forward, walked to the map, and started pointing. "Here, here, and here. They'll probe these sectors first. You let them in, make them think they're winning. Then you collapse the flanks and cut them off." The operators watched her, really watched her. No one was laughing now. "You're talking about bait," Pierce said. "I'm talking about survival." Holt studied the map, her suggestions, the logic behind them. It was brilliant, brutal but brilliant. "How do you know this will work?" She looked at him, and in that moment he saw it, the soldier beneath the scrubs, the operator beneath the humble exterior. "Because I've done it before." 4 words, simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying. Rowan spoke from the corner. "Commander, I suggest we listen." Holt nodded slowly. "All right, Vale, you're in. Show us what you're thinking." And for the next hour, Arden transformed the defensive plan, repositioning forces, identifying weakness in the enemy approach, creating contingencies they hadn't considered. The operators watched, some skeptical, some amazed, all of them paying attention. Because the nurse they'd ignored, the woman they'd dismissed, she was orchestrating a battle plan that might actually save their lives. When it was over, the room slowly emptied, soldiers heading to their positions, preparing for what was coming. Pierce lingered, standing across from Arden. "I was wrong about you," he said. "Yes, you were. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." She didn't answer immediately, just looked at him, reading him. "Words are easy, Lieutenant. Let's see if your actions match them." He nodded and walked out. Arden stood alone in the briefing room. The maps, the markers, the weight of what was coming. She tried to leave this behind, tried to be someone else, someone who saved lives instead of taking them. But the war had found her anyway, and now she had to become what she'd been, one more time. To protect the people who hadn't protected her. Because that's what strength really is. Not holding a grudge, not seeking revenge, but rising above, becoming what's needed, even when it hurts. Even when they don't deserve it. What does it take to finally be seen? The attack came at dawn, just like intelligence predicted, but earlier than expected. The alarm blared across the base, soldiers scrambling to positions, gear rattling, commands shouted, the organized chaos of men preparing to fight for their lives. Arden was in the medical tent, hands moving automatically, prepping trauma stations, stacking supplies, setting up triage areas. But her mind was elsewhere, on the defensive positions, the kill zones, the timing. Outside, the first explosions hit. The perimeter wall erupted in smoke and debris, enemy forces pouring through the breach. The defense plan activated, teams falling back to designated positions, creating the illusion of collapse, drawing the enemy deeper. It was working, but barely. In the command tent, Holt watched the holographic display, red markers flooding into the base, his forces outnumbered, outgunned, desperately trying to hold. Sectors 4 and 6 are breaking, an operator reported, voice tight. Pierce was on the radio, coordinating fire teams, his voice steady now, focused, the arrogance stripped away by the reality of combat. Fall back to secondary line, maintain spacing. But the enemy kept coming, wave after wave, and the defense was crumbling faster than planned. Holt's hands shook, just slightly, the legendary commander facing the collapse of everything he'd built. Arden heard it all from the medical tent, the radio chatter, the explosions getting closer, the desperation in their voices. She finished prepping the last station, looked at her hands, clean, steady. Then she walked outside. The base was chaos, smoke everywhere, tracer rounds cutting through the air, soldiers running, fighting, dying. An RPG hit the command tent, the explosion throwing Holt and Pierce to the ground, dust and debris raining down. Holt scrambled for his radio, but his hands were shaking too violently to key the mic. He was frozen, the warrior broken by the weight of it all. He looked at the map, then at the enemy pouring through the gap, his eyes wide, vacant. He had no orders left. Arden stood amidst the falling debris, watching him crumble, realizing no order was coming. She stepped over the wreckage, didn't look at her medical kit. She looked at the fallen marksman rifle, lying in the dirt next to a dead guard. She picked it up, checked the chamber, swapped the magazine, movements fluid, practiced, ingrained. Holt stared. "What are you doing?" She shouldered the rifle, sighted down range. The first shot rang out. An enemy sniper on the ridge, 300 meters. He dropped instantly. The team gaped. Second shot, severing the enemy comm line, visible in the spark and the way their coordinated advance stuttered. The battlefield paused, enemy advance halting. But it wasn't just the shooting. It was the way she handled the weapon, like it was an extension of her body, natural, terrifying. After the second shot, the rifle jammed. A double feed that would take a regular soldier 10 seconds to clear. Arden didn't even look at the chamber. In one violent blur of motion, she racked the bolt, chopped the magazine, cleared the obstruction, and re-engaged. Before the casing hit the ground. Bam, bam, bam. 3 targets, 3 seconds, 400 meters. She adjusted the windage knob without taking her eye off the scope. A mechanical predator calculating death in real time. Pierce, watching from the dirt, instinctively reached for his sidearm, his brain screaming that this woman was a threat, something unnatural that shouldn't exist in the form of a nurse. No one laughed now. Holt whispered, "Who are you?" Arden fired again, covering a flank where enemy forces were massing. "Keep moving," she said, not a request, a command. Pierce stammered, "She's leading." The SEALs fell in, sinking to her rhythm, pushing back, enemy lines cracking under the precise fire. As the firefight stabilized, the dynamic shattered completely. A young corporal pinned behind a sandbag wall looked to Pierce for orders. Pierce opened his mouth, but the corporal's eyes drifted past him, to Arden, reloading, calm as stone. "Sector 4, suppress the tower," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise with authority that broke no argument. The corporal didn't wait for Pierce's nod. He swung his machine gun and obeyed her instantly. One by one, the other SEALs shifted their alignment, turning their backs on their frozen commander, their arrogant lieutenant, forming a protective wedge around the nurse. They weren't following rank anymore. They were following the predator who knew how to win. Pierce stood alone, his authority evaporating like mist in the desert heat. In the command tent, Rowan activated the emergency channel, pulling encrypted files, data scrolling across the screen. Arden Vale, former strategic sniper, blacked out unit, erased after an operation gone wrong, refused to fire on civilians, vanished, resurfaced as aid worker. Holt read over his shoulder, face paling. Project Wraith, Rowan read aloud, his voice trembling slightly. 112 confirmed kills, specialist in asymmetric warfare and high-value target neutralization. Code name, the White Death. He looked up at the woman, currently directing fire on the perimeter. The screen showed a photo. Younger Arden, holding a sniper rifle almost as big as she was, standing over the body of a warlord the entire coalition had failed to catch for a decade. The nurse they had mocked for carrying bandages was the deadliest thing on the continent. Holt felt the blood drain from his face, realizing he had lectured a ghost on basic tactics. Outside, Arden continued to orchestrate the defense. Commands sharp, exact, flank right, suppress left. The SEALs complied without hesitation, coordination flawless. The enemy advance crumbled, their momentum broken, their confidence shattered. The operation turned, the tide of the campaign shifting. When the dust finally settled and the all-clear signal went up, the silence was deafening. Arden stood atop the breached wall, the sniper rifle resting easily in the crook of her arm, looking out over the smoking valley. Pierce approached her, his swagger replaced by a hesitant, jerky walk. He looked at the weapon in her hands, then at his own, realizing he hadn't fired a single effective shot in the last 10 minutes of engagement. He opened his mouth, an apology, an excuse, anything to bridge the gap. But the words died in his throat. Arden didn't even turn her head. She simply ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and held the rifle out to him, barrel pointed safely downrange. "Your scope is still off," she said quietly. "Fix it." She dropped the weapon into his hands, cold steel of his own inadequacy, and walked past him, leaving him holding everything he thought he was. How do you forgive people who never saw you until you saved them? The aftermath was quieter than the battle. Smoke still rising from damaged structures, medics moving between the wounded, the smell of cordite and blood mixing in the desert air. Arden was back in the medical tent, scrubs traded for bandages and sutures, hands working on a young soldier with shrapnel wounds, talking him through it, keeping him calm. Like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In the command tent, reports were being filed, casualty counts, damage assessments, the bureaucratic cleanup of war. And consequences were rolling in. Pierce got reassigned. His reports flagged for insubordination, questions raised about his leadership during the crisis, the sponsorships he'd lined up for his post-military career quietly drying up. Holt faced review, his leadership questioned, leaked communications showing his paralysis during the assault, the career he'd built on confidence and bravado now cracking under scrutiny. Miller lost his security clearance. Someone leaked his mockery of Arden, the video from the armory where he'd ignored her warning, his whispers spreading through the unit, iced out by the very people he'd served with. One by one, the men who dismissed her felt the weight of their choices. But Arden walked through it all, silent, her presence commanding respect without a word, without seeking it. She didn't gloat, didn't remind them of what they'd done. She just kept working, kept saving lives, kept being what she'd always been. Someone who chose life over ego. The base quieted under the setting sun. Arden was packing her gear, Rotation orders had come through, time to move on, another base, another group of wounded who'd need her. Rowan approached, standing at the entrance of her tent. "You changed everything," he said. She nodded once, not looking up from her packing. "They'll remember this," he continued. "Remember you. They'll remember what they need to remember." "And what's that?" She paused, looked at him. "That strength isn't always loud, and value isn't always visible." Rowan smiled slightly. "Where will you go?" "Wherever they need a nurse. You could do more, train operators, consult. The military would." "I'm done being a soldier," she interrupted, quiet but firm. "I did that. I was good at it, but it cost me pieces I won't get back." "So you just save people now?" "I just save people now." Rowan nodded, started to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, thank you." "You're welcome." Outside, Holt stood at a distance, watching her tent. He'd been there for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to approach. Finally, he walked over, stood where Rowan had been. Arden looked up, saw him, waited. "I owe you an apology," Holt said, the words heavy, difficult. "You owe me nothing, Commander. I treated you like you didn't matter. You treated me like you thought I was. Can't fault you for that. I should have seen." "No," she cut him off, stood, faced him directly. "You shouldn't have had to see what I was. You should have treated me with respect regardless, because I was a person, because I was there. That should have been enough." The words landed, hard, true. Holt had no response, just stood there, the weight of his mistake pressing down. "I'm sorry," he finally said, meaning it. "I know." She shouldered her pack, walked past him, stopped just beyond the tent. "For what it's worth, Commander, you're not a bad leader. You're just a human one, flawed like everyone else. The question is what you do with that knowledge." She walked away, leaving him standing there. And Holt realized something fundamental. He'd spent his career building an image, the tough commander, the decisive leader, the man who won battles through strength and certainty. But Arden had shown him a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need recognition, that doesn't demand respect, that simply exists, quietly, powerfully. The kind that saves people who didn't deserve saving. Later that night, the base gathered for a memorial, for the soldiers lost in the assault, names read aloud, flags presented, the ritual of honoring the fallen. Arden stood at the back, silent, respectful. When it ended, some of the soldiers approached her, not with apologies, not with excuses, just with quiet nods, acknowledgement, the beginning of understanding. Miller handed her a folded flag. "For what you did." She took it, nodded, said nothing. Because sometimes words aren't necessary. Actions speak louder, and in the end, the only thing that matters is what you do when no one is watching. When no one expects anything from you. When you're invisible. Arden left the base the next morning, a convoy heading south, new assignment, new people who wouldn't know her name, wouldn't know what she'd done, wouldn't care about her past. And that was fine with her. Because she didn't do it for recognition. She did it because it needed to be done, because people needed help, because in a world that constantly tries to tell you you're not enough, the only way to survive is to prove it wrong. Not with words, not with arguments, but with actions. With choices made when the world isn't watching. The convoy disappeared into the desert dust, and the base returned to its routine, training, missions, the endless cycle of war. But something had changed, in the way people looked at each other, in the way they treated the support staff, the contractors, the ones who weren't operators but were still there, still serving. Because Arden Vale had taught them a lesson they'd never forget. That value isn't determined by rank, by uniform, by the size of your rifle or the medals on your chest. Value is determined by what you do when it matters, when lives are on the line, when the world is falling apart and someone needs to step up. And sometimes the person who steps up is the one no one expected, the one everyone ignored, the one who was there all along, just waiting for the moment when their quiet strength would be needed most. You know that feeling when the world underestimates you, but you stand anyway. It hurts, it cuts deep, every dismissive look, every mocking laugh, every time they walk past you like you're invisible. It shapes you, hardens you, makes you question if you're enough, if you matter. And the temptation is there, to prove them wrong, to force them to see you, to demand the respect you deserve. But real strength doesn't demand anything. It simply exists. Arden Vale understood that. She'd lived it. In every base, every mission, every moment someone treated her like she didn't belong. She could have told them who she was, shown them her records, forced them to acknowledge her past. But she didn't. Because the woman who'd been the White Death, who'd taken down targets governments couldn't touch, who'd operated in shadows and legends, had learned something those men never would. That the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most important one. That authority born from fear is temporary, but authority born from respect is eternal. That you don't prove your worth by beating people over the head with it. You prove it by being present, consistent, real. And when the moment comes, when everything falls apart and people need someone to lead, you step up. Not because you have to prove anything, but because it's the right thing to do. Even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. Because that's what separates people who seek validation from people who are genuinely strong. The strong ones don't need applause. They don't need recognition. They don't need anyone to tell them they matter. They already know. And they use that strength not to elevate themselves, but to elevate others, even the ones who tore them down, even the ones who made them feel small. Because growth isn't about holding grudges, it's about rising above, being better, choosing dignity over revenge. Arden chose dignity every day, when Pierce kicked her bag, when Miller laughed at her knowledge, when Holt dismissed her warnings. She chose dignity when the battle came, when she could have let them fail, let them face the consequences of their arrogance. But she didn't. She saved them, protected them, led them. Not because they deserved it, but because it was right. And in doing so, she taught them something they'd carry forever. That the measure of a person isn't in their title, their rank, their reputation. It's in their choices, their actions, their willingness to do what's necessary even when it costs them everything. Arden Vale paid that cost long before she ever stepped onto that base. She'd paid it when she refused to fire on civilians, when she walked away from her entire career, when she chose to save lives instead of take them. She'd paid it with loneliness, with invisibility, with the constant ache of being dismissed by people who couldn't see past their own egos. But she never stopped being who she was. And when the moment came, when lives hung in the balance, she didn't hesitate. She became what they needed, even though they'd never given her what she needed. That's strength. That's courage. That's what it means to stand when the world underestimates you. Not by proving them wrong through anger, not by demanding they see you, but by being so undeniably present, so unquestionably valuable, that they have no choice but to recognize what was there all along. You're not alone in this feeling, this experience, this pain of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like you don't matter. But here's what Arden's story teaches us. Your value doesn't depend on other people seeing it. It exists whether they acknowledge it or not. And the people who can't see it, that's their limitation, not yours. Keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep being present even when it's hard, even when they don't appreciate it. Because eventually, the moment will come when your quiet strength becomes impossible to ignore. And in that moment, you won't need to say anything. Your actions will speak louder than any words ever could. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. and the world has no choice but to listen.